Everybody ready? Ready?
Yeah.
All right, listen.
It's your weekend show.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
With Bob Biermann.
It's great.
There are times I have to remember that this program reaches around the world, and from time to time I may talk about things that are happening in my neck of the woods where I live. Matter of fact, I live in the United States, in the state of Georgia, and we talked recently about the solar eclipse, and this past week we've been talking about locally what's happening down in the state of Texas, where this hurricane has come in and caused so much damage and flooding. And I realize from time to time that maybe somebody listening on the Voice of Hope in Africa, or listening from WRMI out of Okeechobee, Florida, maybe in Europe, maybe in the United Kingdom, maybe even in South America, may sometimes not identify with those things I might be talking about at any given time. But this is a program about life, the life that we together share. And like I say, that means from time to time I may be talking about something that happened not far from where I live, though I'd like to find out more about the places you're hearing the program. Once again, this is your weekend show, and I'm your host, Bob Biermann, welcoming you today to another program. I talked last week quite a bit about the solar eclipse that had come to the United States almost 2 weeks ago, and the big event that it was back in the 21st of August. And we talked a lot about how some people are trying to make this eclipse some kind of a sign in the heavens that God is about to do something. And I've listened to so many people, and we talked about this last week, that are using this and trying to tie this to other dates, and I'm thinking to myself, as I said last week, over the past 5,000 years, there have been 18,000 different eclipses like this one around the world. And so I have a hard time understanding why this one that just happened to be over the United States makes it so special. I don't think that it does. Well, enough about the eclipse. Let's talk about life in general, where things are today. Here in the United States, these past several days, we've had stories out of the state of Texas because of this hurricane that formed in the Gulf of Mexico and has caused such great devastation around Houston. The storm literally hit the shore, came back off and back on again into areas like Beaumont. And right now, there are hundreds of thousands of people displaced, record amount of rainfall, the type they've never seen before that we have in recorded history. It's one of those kind of storms that you really can never plan for in this life, but they do happen. And this one will not be fixed in days or weeks or months. It'll take years, literally many years, to rebuild what was lost by this enormous and most powerful storm. We here at your weekend show, our prayers, our thoughts, and our concerns go out to all of those that have been impacted in the state of Texas and Louisiana. And a storm of this size will also provide large amounts of rain and potentially additional flooding in many other areas located literally hundreds of miles from where this storm hit. It is a reminder that life does have storms, and things that we never think will happen can happen. In my lifetime, I've thought about how things like Mount St. Helens out west, when that volcano erupted and the devastation it left. A few years back in Japan, there was an earthquake out in the Pacific Ocean that caused a tsunami, which caused devastation and the loss of a nuclear power plant and the devastation there. How do you plan for these storms of life? Because the truth is, these storms of life will come. This is your weekend show, and I'm your host, Bob Biermann.
In the dark of the midnight have I oft hid my face, while the storm howls above me and there's no hiding place. Did the crash of the thunder, precious Lord, hear my cry, keep me safe till the storm passes by. Till the storm passes over, till the thunder sounds no more, till the clouds roll forever from the sky. Hold me fast, let me stand in the hollow of thy hand. Keep me safe till the storm passes by. Many times Satan whispered, there is no need to try, for there's no end of sorrow, there's no hope by and by. But I know thou art with me, and tomorrow I'll rise where the stars never darken the sky. Till the storm passes over, till the thunder sounds no more, till the clouds roll forever from the sky. Hold me fast and let me stand in the hollow of thy hand, and keep me safe till the storm passes by. Hold me fast and let me stand in the hollow of thy hand, and keep me safe till the storm passes by. And keep me safe till the storm passes by.
Let's keep the people in Texas and Louisiana in our prayers as they begin their rebuilding process after this devastating hurricane. A reminder once again, you're listening to your weekend show. I'm your host, Bob Biermann. I would like to, on the program today, replay an interview from a few months back. I had the opportunity of being at the National Association of Shortwave Broadcasters and interviewed Ray Robinson with the Voice of Hope, who airs this program on their Voice of Hope shortwave station in Africa. We sometimes forget the power of the shortwave medium and HF communications, which have been very vital, by the way, in this hurricane in the United States. So I want to replay that interview and get you back up to speed on shortwave, and I think it's a great interview to hear one more time. This is your weekend show, and I'm your host, Bob Biermann.
Who taught the sun where to stand in the morning? And who told the ocean you can only come this far? And who showed the moon where to hide till evening? Whose words alone can catch a falling star? Well, I know my Redeemer lives. I same God that spins things in orbit, runs to the weary, the worn and the weak, and the same gentle hands that hold me when I'm broken. They conquer death to bring me victory. Now I know my Redeemer lives. I know my Redeemer lives. Let all creation testify. Let this life within me cry. I know my Redeemer. He lives to take away my shame, and He lives forever. I'll proclaim that the payment for my sin was the precious life He gave. But now He is alive, and there's an empty grave. And I know my Redeemer. I know my Redeemer. Because He lives, I can face
And welcome back to your weekend show. I'm your host, Bob Biermann. So glad you're with us today on this special weekend. As I told you in the prior segment, I spent some time at the National Association of Shortwave Broadcasters meeting, which occurred in Simi Valley, California. And it was an exciting time, as we talked about in the last segment. But I want to take a few minutes right now to focus on the impact that shortwave radio really does have in the world. A lot of people will tell you that everything is online only, and the world only listens online, but nothing could be farther from the truth. If you look at the world's population of over 6 billion people, you're going to find that there is a large number that are not being reached on a daily basis by any online means. And in many parts of the world, the information they get, the service they get, can be very controlled. International shortwave is known to go across those international boundaries, and especially when bringing some real news, and most important, some good news, and for a very difficult part of the world, a voice of hope. And it's my privilege to have in the studio Ray Robinson with the Voice of Hope, and I'm also honored to be affiliated with them because they allow this program to be heard on one of their facilities in Africa, in Zambia. Ray, welcome to your weekend show. It's about time.
Bob, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to be here. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Voice of Hope runs 3 stations currently around the world. We have Voice of Hope Americas here in California that broadcasts in Spanish to Latin America. Mm-hmm. We have Voice of Hope for Africa in Zambia, based just outside of Lusaka, that broadcasts in English and covers about 75% of that continent, including all of the English-speaking countries. And then we just recently opened a Voice of Hope for the Middle East with a transmitter in northern Israel that broadcasts in Arabic to the audiences in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, northern Israel, Cyprus, and so forth, but primarily to reach out to Arabic-speaking peoples in that region.
I want to start by going backwards. I want to talk about the Voice of Hope in the Middle East. And this is the newest station that you just put on the air. And tell us the frequency and the dial position, power.
Voice of Hope for the Middle East is an AM broadcast band station. It's on a frequency of 1287 kilohertz, medium wave. It's a 50 kilowatt transmitter, a very powerful voice. We've had reports from northern Lebanon, from Syria, from Jordan. We know it's receivable on ordinary car radios in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Amman, which are about 75 to 80 miles south of the transmitter site. So the signal's certainly getting out there. The transmitter site actually is 22 linear miles from Damascus, 23 miles from Haifa, and 23 miles from Beirut. It's kind of right in the middle of those three cities. And a 50 kilowatt transmitter can really get out in that area.
And what impresses me about the Voice of Hope you have just built there is your target audience. The target audience is not Israel, even though it's broadcasting in Israel. Your target audience is definitely the Arab world.
Yeah, Israel is a gracious host, and they're very glad to have us. It was a privilege to get a broadcast license from them. But they see that there's a value in the kind of message that we carry in helping to bring encouragement and stability to the areas surrounding the country of Israel. Obviously, you know, it's a very turbulent time, and Christians there in particular under great persecution, particularly in Syria, many of them in camps, temporary encampments in Jordan and in Lebanon. We want to reach out and bring encouragement to those folks, bring them some basic information and teaching, a little levity perhaps even. There's nothing wrong with having fun on the air, you know, we want to do that too. But we also want to be reaching out to the Muslim populations of those countries and bringing them the good news, perhaps for the first time, something they've never heard before, the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's our purpose in being there. Maybe
you can't talk about this too much, but I think if you can, there's some other things you're hoping to do if the door is open in that part of the world. Well, Voice of Hope originated in South Lebanon in 1979 and broadcast from there from 79 to 2000. At the time, there was a civil war going on within Lebanon, and the southern part of the country was very much under Israeli control. The Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, was the power really in that area. And we operated a station in southern Lebanon under the protection of the Israelis called the Voice of Hope. It had to close in 2000 when Israel withdrew completely from that buffer zone in southern Lebanon. But at the time that original Voice of Hope broadcast, it was an AM station on 945 kilohertz, but it also had shortwave. And I believe they use different frequencies at different times, but 6280 is one that I remember well, and I believe 6210 they were on. And then also some higher frequencies as well. And they were broadcasting to countries to the east of Israel, also up into Central Asia, Uzbekistan and Russia and places like that. So we have a vision. We'd like to be able to add shortwave to the existing AM facility in Israel, and the Israelis have welcomed us to do that. It's a question of raising the funding, of course. Transmitters are not cheap. And this station could reach into Iran, correct? It could. What we'd like to do is put some of our Arabic programming on the shortwave that would reach Iraq with a single hop. For Iran. And then Farsi for Iran, absolutely. And Iran is such a challenge because it's a people group that really are isolated by their language. Farsi is only spoken there, and I believe a little bit north of the border in Tajikistan. There's a small area that speaks Farsi there as well. But otherwise, Farsi isn't spoken anywhere else in the world, and the people in Iran don't have good language skills. Farsi is what they know and what they speak, and somebody needs to be reaching out to them besides their own government, which is producing what we would consider to be somewhat biased information. And aside perhaps from the BBC, there are very few other voices reaching out to the people of Iran, and we think we can add to that to bring them some clarity and some truth. Do you know off the top of your head what the population of Iran is by chance? I can't remember. Maybe you can. I don't have that number to hand. But I know it's going to be significant considering the size of the country, the impact that it has, the resources that it contains inside of its borders. And also knowing its history, when you go back to the 1970s, when the Shah of Iran was disposed, and everything radically changed overnight. Absolutely.
Of course, many Iranians left the country at that time, and we have many in the US now. Here in Los Angeles, there's a sizable Iranian population.
So to find people that could produce programming in the Farsi language is not impossible.
Oh, absolutely not. We would have resources here we could draw upon, but that would also have a slightly different flavor to it, perhaps, than people that are living under the regime in Iran right now. So we would look to get programming that is produced by Farsi-speaking ministers in the Middle East. I think that would be a definite goal.
Now let's go down to Zambia, and that's where this program is heard, and I am just excited. I'm trying to remember the pastor's name. He sent me an email and a picture, a couple of pictures, and he thought I would get a kick from these pictures. And the picture said, this is listeners to your show on the Voice of Hope. And out there at some church in a very rural area, sitting in these white plastic chairs in a circle around a table outside of a church was a radio on that table, and they're quietly listening to your weekend show. And I just looked at that and I about cried, because I wondered, I was just thinking the week before, what impact am I really having? Is anybody listening to this program?
Bob, I remember that email. It was just a couple of months ago, and I don't know if you remember. Do you remember where that pastor was located?
I want to say Kenya.
Yeah, absolutely. He was in Kenya. He was in remote Kenya, rural Kenya, not in Nairobi. And we're down in Lusaka. So, I mean, it is a testament to how strong the signal is and how much it covers. We have an omnidirectional transmission from Lusaka that covers most of the central southern part of Africa, from Kenya all the way down to Cape Town and the full width of that southern part of the continent. And then we have another powerful transmitter that beams a signal into West Africa, targeting primarily Nigeria, but it also covers the whole of the West African region. And it's a privilege to know that our content is being appreciated like that. We want to reach Christians, and we want to reach the unchurched who can understand English. We realize not everybody has had the privilege of an education where they've learned good English. I mean, most of the people in Africa speak a local tribal language first, but English in many countries is the lingua franca that enables them to communicate with people from other tribes in other parts of the country. In Zambia, where we operate, there are 42 different language groups, but they have a slogan which says, "One Zambia, we are one people." And the way they maintain that commonality and bring a sense of unity and purpose to the people is by ensuring everybody is educated to speak English. And it's that way in many countries. So to be able to reach people directly in English is a privilege, but we also want to be able to reach out to pastors and educators and to be able to put good teaching in their hands that then they can perhaps translate into local languages for their own local congregations.
And it's also like a continuing education for pastors, because, you know, I went through seminary, but you never stop learning.
That's right. And of course, so many people, particularly in the rural areas, don't have access to the internet. And even those who do, it's often on a very limited basis. Most people there have phones that give them voice and text. And we get a lot of response into the studio in Lusaka through text. Even email is a challenge for many people. They just don't have access to that technology.
And we're not talking thousands. We're talking millions upon millions of people on that continent.
That's right. I think the global statistic is that somewhere around 52% of the people in the world today have access to the internet. Now, having access doesn't actually mean they have it, but they have access to it.
And it can be very limited.
But that means that there's an awful lot of people, billions of people, who don't even have access. And many governments in third world countries use shortwave as a means of reaching their own people. The Zambian government does that themselves. The Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation is on 5915 kilohertz in the 49 meter band. That's how they reach their rural population. They broadcast on FM in the cities, but there's many parts of the country that are way outside the coverage area of FM. AM doesn't work very well in the tropics. It's a very staticky band in the tropic zones. So it's either FM or shortwave, and shortwave is what people are used to. I've been to Zambia 3 times in the last couple of years, and I've rented a couple of cars there, actually pickup trucks, and I was surprised to find on both of them there was a Sony radio in the car, in the dash, and both of them had shortwave on. I was surprised. But
And that is
they
not
did.
as uncommon as you would think. I remember one time buying a car up in Long Island in New York, and I went to buy a radio for it, so I went into Manhattan to get a radio. I decided to save some money, and I bought a Panasonic radio, which was they call the DIN mount, which would be what that car required, and it was AM, FM, and shortwave and cassette.
Right.
And the radio was actually supposed to go to somewhere in the Middle East and ended up in New York, so they were selling it at one of those those secondhand or wholesale kind of places. And so apparently that was very common and still is in many parts of the world to be able to find AM, FM, and shortwave.
Yep, it's true.
So that was amazing. Now, let's come back stateside for a few minutes. And you have a facility, it's in Los Angeles, or actually technically Simi Valley, where we are right now, and that is KVOH, the Voice of Hope. And we were actually up at the transmitter site just the other day, and it was an exciting time. I got to see it again and some of the progress on some of the work you're doing to expand and increase the ministry here at home. And right now, that station is broadcasting on one frequency at the moment, and its target is actually into Cuba and Central America in Spanish. Tell us about that frequency and what your plan is for it, what it's doing currently, and your future plan.
Well, you're absolutely right, Bob. That station is on a mountaintop that overlooks the San Fernando Valley. It's a fantastic vista from up there. But it's the land that God gave us, and we are very grateful to have it, and we're able to build the station there. It's a log periodic antenna, and we currently are using a rather old RCA transmitter running at about 50 kilowatts.
And that transmitter has got a unique history.
It really does. But
it started out as many years ago with Radio Vatican.
That's right.
And it was a dual, what they call an ambiphase RCA 100 kW, which has been converted to two independent 50 kW transmitters. And you used it for a while in English at night, and you had a different frequency by day.
Yeah, that transmitter has been through end-of-life scenarios at least 4 times that I'm aware of. It started, as you said, in Vatican Radio back in the early 60s. It was bought from the Vatican by HCJB and was installed and used in Ecuador, in Quito, for many years. In the mid-1980s, it was sold by HCJB and was bought by Transworld Radio and was, not Transworld Radio, by George Otis of High Adventure Ministries, who brought it up to California and eventually sent one transmitter that he bought from them out to Palau in Micronesia and installed the other one here, this RCA that we're still using today. And it was actually switched off in 2009 and was off the air for a few years until Strategic Communications Group was able to obtain the license and the transfer and everything and bring it back on the air. So we're pleased to have been able to reactivate it. We do want to bring back English language programming in the evenings. We also have a second transmitter here, and I mentioned Transworld Radio a few minutes ago. We bought another transmitter, a Harris 100 kilowatt unit from them, which we brought from Guam, and in the process of installing on the top of the mountain, you saw the transmitter yourself, and you know the condition it's in. It's needed a bit of work, but once we get that on the air too, we think we'll have a very viable broadcast platform that we'll have some better frequency agility then to be able to choose frequencies that perhaps are better suited for North American as well as Central American and Caribbean consumption. Our antenna beam is on Cuba. It's 100 degrees from here, but that means it also has a fair degree of coverage both north and south of that beam. So we have pretty much a powerhouse signal throughout Mexico, down through Central America. We get reports from Colombia, from Venezuela, along the north coast of South America. Obviously from Cuba, I think maybe 50% of our responses come from Cuba, Dominican Republic, other islands in the Caribbean. And then when you come to the north, we're heard very well the other side of the Rockies, throughout Texas and across to Florida and up towards Washington, D.C. That area is very strong. We get reports from New England, the Canadian Maritimes, Ontario, and we have a lobe that goes off the back of the antenna, giving us pretty decent coverage into Washington State and British Columbia and so forth up there as well. So it's a platform we think will still be of interest and viability into the future. We're looking at the concept of digital shortwave and DRM. And
I was going to get into that in just a moment.
Would like to do some experimentation with that and perhaps provide a digital service for North America from one of our transmitters here.
And let me just add to that from a technical standpoint and try to put it into layman's language. It is kind of like, how do you take staticky AM and make it sound like a CD? It can be done, and this is the technology that is just around the corner for HF and shortwave broadcasting to not just make the reach around the world, but to do it in such a way where you can send data and information, even song title information, and an outstanding audio quality. And it's hard to believe that we are this close to seeing that kind of technology in regular usage.
That's absolutely right. I've heard test broadcasts, and I've heard the quality that can be achieved by using digital transmission on short waves, and it's absolutely astounding. It's better than FM quality. The challenge until now has been the lack of radios that people can go out and buy in stores to receive digital shortwave.
But we both know that in today's mass production world, and even out of China, this is, if there's a market, they'll be built.
Exactly.
And if there are stations that are broadcasting, there's no doubt they'll be built.
There are countries around the world, India is probably the foremost at this point, that have invested billions into their broadcast infrastructure to provide digital transmissions on both medium wave and shortwave. And that hundreds of millions of people in India are going to be interested in buying this kind of technology. As long as the price is reasonable, and there are vendors out there working on solutions right now we know of that are going to be well under $100 per unit.
And I've even seen some that may be below 50.
Yep.
And something else.
So it's an exciting time, really, for the shortwave world. Shortwave is still depended on in so many parts of the world, but now it's going to become more attractive too, because a lot of the quality issues that people have associated with shortwave in the past will go away with the conversion to digital.
There are a lot of people that think that radio is going away. I've read people make comments like, well, isn't radio dead, or is it going to be gone by 2020? Isn't the FCC going to shut this down? No, they're not. There's too much of an investment in radio. And, a lot of people think that because they are trying to build their own little, one-man show internet station, and so they believe that's where the world is. But radio, especially when half the world has no internet access, and I would venture to say that half of the other half, the speeds and bandwidth and amount of data they can get is slow, limited, and very expensive, so they're very cautious on what they use that data for. Not like Western Europe and the United States and the major cities where you can stream YouTube. I don't think there are a whole lot of people streaming YouTube in Zambia.
That's true.
Bandwidth
but,
is going to be an issue.
I would not decry those people who are listening who do have internet access and do have broadband. We as a broadcaster embrace the digital technologies.
Use it all.
The ability to download podcasts of your favorite programs. What radio can provide is a platform that lets people discover new content. You can twiddle around with a radio and you can find somebody who's saying something interesting. You can listen. You can decide, this is somebody I want to hear more of. And then you can go find a podcast of that program that's available in better quality and on a time schedule that suits whatever time you have available. And that's how you can listen in the future. But to find the program to begin with, if radio wasn't there, you would probably never know about that content.
Because with 10 or 12,000 broadcasters or 100,000 little stations online, there's no way to do it.
That's right. You can't see the wood for the trees. It gets lost in the detail.
We've been at this convention, this conference this week for the NASB, the National Association of Broadcasters, and I know that KVOH, of course, is a member. I spent a lot of time with WRMI in Okeechobee. We're also members and others. And to me, I think the overriding theme of most of our talks, especially outside of any session, has been about the DRM, or the digital radio version of shortwave. And it is exciting. I had a chance back in the summer of last year in Miami to hear a demonstration and to see the equipment, and I realized the absolute potential of this to use an Android-based radio, which is what many phones are based on, where you can take your digital information. We saw a presentation about being able to send information using HF to take it to those parts of the world that are decades away from ever having fiber optic, if ever.
Absolutely. So it's very. I'm excited by the possibility of DRM, digital shortwave. I'm also excited to hear that there are 3 new shortwave stations currently under construction in the United States.
And people think it's all shutting down, and I can understand. You know, it is a unique band, and I can tell you from my time in emergency management, I spent a few years in there, we would always recommend to have an AM, FM, weather band radio, and even later we started adding, you may want to consider one of those all-band radios that include shortwave, because if a major disaster or war struck out somewhere, maybe not here in the United States, but somewhere else, that may be your only source of radio and information when your local FM is down.
That's right. That's right.
So shortwave is one of the older bands after AM, but it has been around and it has been providing information. And I think what still impresses me is the emails that this program gets when we have the opportunity to talk about the important topics of life, and the variety of people right here in the United States or overseas that respond. They're still there.
Yeah.
So
I had to chuckle when I was looking at some of the discussion online a few months ago when ABC shut down their shortwave service to the Northern Territories of Australia. 3 particular stations that they had there that were broadcasting to the rural population, and they shut them down. One of the comments from the ABC was shortwave is a 100-year-old technology and we need to move on to digital platforms, and they were putting their dollar budgets and resources into beefing up their delivery platforms to urban listeners who had access to broadband internet. And
in the major cities,
the one of the wits who responded, I saw, said, okay, so shortwave is a 100-year-old technology, but it works. Electricity is a 100-year-old technology. Are we going to get rid of that too? You know, if it works, why not still use it? And the reality is FM has it's good quality, but it has a limited range. AM is not such good quality, but it goes a lot further. Shortwave is also not such good quality, but it goes the furthest. You can go 5,000, 10,000 miles with a shortwave signal and cover those areas that you cannot reach any other way. And that's why it's still going to be a valid tool in many parts of this world, particularly in the third world, in Africa, in parts of Asia, in South America. It's going to be a tool that people depend on as a lifeline. And that's why it's going to have life for many years to come.
And when you add the digital component and new stations broadcasting in that mode, there are 3 advantages that come to mind. Number 1, the sound quality vastly improves to FM or near CD quality, or roughly at CD or better than MP3. Number 1. Number 2, data information about what you're listening to on the screen. And the distance that it covers is huge. To bring a good listenable signal thousands of miles away to people that have no other way of hearing anything, to use that technology. And even in the backwoods of Africa, so to speak, the price is not going to be that bad for people or families to save up $49 to have the radio.
Yeah.
It's possible.
A $50 radio is certainly viable. I would like for it to be a little less than that, but if that's what it takes, I think many people would find the money to do it if the content was worth it, if the quality was there. And we know that the quality with DRM is just superb. In fact, we were just hearing at the NASB conference here this week from a speaker from France about a new project called SmartCast, which is using digital DRM shortwave transmissions from France, where they are using both shortwave and medium wave for this to cover the sea areas around France. They have a medium wave transmitter on the west coast of France that's broadcasting out into the Bay of Biscay and beyond in the North Atlantic. And they have a shortwave transmitter in the center of France that's beaming to the south, covering most of the Mediterranean. And their intent is to cover their shipping at sea, both merchant shipping, the Navy, and also pleasure liners,
And be able to send data, no less.
They can send both audio and data. So they'll be relaying some of the French national networks, but also sending weather information and other alerts, news headlines, that kind of thing by data over the same signals.
And some people say, well, why do that? What about satellite? Well, this actually comes out to be cheaper than satellite.
Which is exactly why Radio New Zealand has been using it to reach their stations or stations they're in partnership with throughout the South Pacific. Radio New Zealand International has used DRM for many years, and it's because it's the most economic means of distribution of their program content to broadcasters who relay that programming to their own local audiences. It beats satellite many times over. It's a very economical way of delivering high-quality content.
Do you ever wonder at times in this ministry, and I don't think you expected to be doing this not that many years ago, but the door was open for you by the Lord.
That's right.
To be here. Are you ever surprised by the things that you've seen happen, or have you gotten to the point that I've gotten to in life where you just know it's God, and you just know that He opened the door, and you kind of get expecting even when it seems like it can't happen?
Oh, I stand amazed constantly. It's a God thing. I could never have planned the last few years. Who would have known where things would lead? When John Taylor, the president of Strategic Communications Group, agreed to accept the transmitter that's being used for KVOH here in Los Angeles and to put that back on the air and accept all the risks and the financial responsibility that went with putting a station like that on the air, who was to know that in the years to come it would lead to having two powerful transmitters in Zambia covering a large part of that continent, the door opening to have a station in Israel broadcasting to the Middle East. We have an FM station here in Simi Valley providing a valuable service to the local community, 99.1 FM The Ranch. It's wonderful the way things have opened up, and I'm sure that the Lord has other things planned for us in the future.
There's no doubt in my mind about that.
So I just stand amazed. I stand amazed.
As I look at the future of this radio show and where I feel at times God leading, I'm one of those leftover believers in shortwave. I mean, I had a guy that I'm not going to say who it was who once said, who needs a 60-some-odd-year-old broadcast engineer? The world's gone online. And I thought to myself, no, not all the world is online, and you've gone now to the place where you're now the smallest fish in the biggest pond once you've left conventional radio. And I just see a future for this, and I think that as our world becomes increasingly unstable, it's going to be things like shortwave that will be reliable and dependable and believable.
Yep. I think the content is paramount. We need to be true to our listeners. We need not to be presenting propaganda, but we need to be presenting truth. We need to be authentic. And there's no harm in having some fun on the air as well.
No.
It needs to be entertaining. And I think we have a great responsibility to use the airwaves, God created them after all, to bring people to a point where they realize there's a better way and a better path for the future than what they have been experiencing to this point.
There's a man that lived, he passed away not that many years ago, and I had a chance to do a little bit of work for his ministry. Oh, it's got to be 25 years ago or longer. It was a radio station at a place called the Lord's Ranch, Father Thomas.
KJES.
Yes, and I went there to do a little bit of work on a transmitter. And the Lord just put me watching a TV show late one night. I suddenly couldn't sleep, got up, just fed up, I couldn't sleep. And I put on the TV, and there he was talking about his broken shortwave radio station. And the next day I called to say, how can I help? And they flew me down there to fix it. And the one thing that he said to me, that it didn't mean anything when he said it. I was kind of, your programming is kind of weird, was what I was thinking at the time. He had all these kids singing and reading psalms and spiritual songs, and it was no real programming. That's all they had. And I remember asking, I said, so what else are you going to do with this radio station? He goes, nothing. He said, the Lord laid on my heart that the devil, Satan himself, is the prince of the air. And all I'm doing is invading his space with God's word. And that's what God called me to do. And he said, that's all I'm going to do. Somebody else may do something different. But right now, I'm holding this place. I remember him saying, I'm holding this place in trust. And all I need to do is just irritate the devil himself by interfering with the air. Well, and I never forgot that.
Well, that resonates with me. We just pray that the Lord gives us wisdom to use the resources he's blessed us with to best advantage, to take our responsibility seriously, but to be sure that we get the message out and expose people in other parts of the world perhaps to ideas, thoughts, teachings, music that they may not have any other means of listening to.
We had one of the people here from Transworld Radio, and what does my heart good, I remember years ago working for Tacoma Falls College's radio ministry, and we had this one student, an announcer at our radio station, and he just had this, and he'll forgive me for saying this, kind of an arrogant attitude that I'm going to be playing nothing but contemporary Christian music at some FM radio station because that's all that counts. Kind of like the internet-only guys of today. You know, he had a narrow focus. And he started getting curious. We actually hired him when he graduated to go down to our FM in Fort Myers, and he was kind of fighting about the music. But he started getting an interest in the electronic side, the engineering, and he called me up one day and said, how do I learn how to be an engineer? And I started him on the path. And he eventually left that station in Florida and became a missionary with TRW, and he has worked on and serviced some of their biggest shortwave rigs around the world.
Wow. And
to see where he is today, you know, I often play a song in this program, you know, I have great plans for you, says the Lord. And the old saying goes, if you want to see God laugh, tell him your long-range plans. and I think of, you know, my friend Joe Barker. We were talking about him today and what an asset he has been for Transworld Radio. And I think of the other Christian broadcasters that we had at this meeting this week and the impact that they have and their special place in mission. It's like everybody has the place that God sends their message. And it's amazing to see that God hasn't given up on shortwave.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, I'm not wedded to shortwave necessarily. I mean, we'll use whatever tools we have available
like this show
to get the word out.
This show's a podcast on Spreaker. It's on SoundCloud and YouTube and a bunch of other places along with the website. So, yeah, there's plenty of downloads and listens.
But shortwave certainly remains viable, and we will use it.
We will.
Make no apology for it.
Anything else you'd like to add about Voice of Hope and how people can find out more about the work you're doing?
Well, I'm grateful for the program you produce each week. We're glad to be able to carry that on Voice of Hope Africa. We'd carry it elsewhere, except that's the only station we have right now that's broadcasting in English. If you decided to produce a version in Spanish or in Arabic, please let me know.
Farsi.
But yeah, if anybody wants to know more about... I guess I need to
buy a Rosetta Stone and learn real fast.
Oh, there you go. You could do that. If you want to know more about Voice of Hope, the website is voiceofhope.com. And if you can't pick up our shortwave signals, there are web streams there. Click on Listen Live, and you can pick any one of the 3 streams for the 3 Voice of Hope stations. We have our program schedules on there with all of the transmission information. So that's where to get more details.
And, you know, I really would encourage people that listen to this program, to go to your website. Give that again.
voiceofhope.com.
And when you want to think about the instability and all the troubles in the Middle East, go to the stream there. Now, you may not understand the language and what's being said, but know that it's a voice of hope in a very troubled region.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't understand Arabic either, but I've listened to the stream. I like the music that's being played. Have you ever heard Arabic jazz before? We have some of that on that stream. It really sounds very good. And we do ID on there, by the way, in English as well as in Arabic. Mm-hmm. And the IDs were produced by our talented staff here. So.
And I'm going to ask the listeners to this program to keep in prayer the continued upgrade and addition at the Voice of Hope here in Simi Valley, the shortwave station with the new transmitter, that it gets online. I know you have kind of a target date, and I really pray that you'll meet it. Something tells me you might just do it.
Well, if we can, we will. And that's
and what are your plans for that particular frequency when it's up and running?
Once we have the new transmitter in place, first of all, it's a transmitter that gives us the ability to broadcast in digital modes as well as analog. Mm-hmm. So we'd have the DRM capability. But we would like to be able to use frequencies that can reach in Spanish, the populations we're targeting in Latin America, mm-hmm. but also in English, North America, and the Caribbean. We think there's still a viable audience there for good content that we can provide.
Well, God willing, I might even find your weekend show on that frequency at some point if things work out.
Entirely possible.
Listen, Ray, I want to thank you for being with me today, Ray Robinson with the Voice of Hope. And I want to thank you for the privilege you've given me and your weekend show to reach an audience that I never would have dreamed I'd be reaching when the show started 2 years ago.
You're welcome, Bob, and we're glad you're getting great response.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name, sing like never before, oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing Your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name, sing like never before, oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. You're rich in love and You're slow to anger. Your name is great and Your heart is kind. For all Your goodness I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. So bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name, sing like never before, oh my soul, I worship Your holy name. Bless You, Lord. is failing, the end draws near, and my time has come. Still my soul will sing your praise unending. 10,000 years and then forevermore. Forevermore. Bless the Lord, oh my soul. Oh my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul. Worship your holy name. Come on, bless the Lord, oh my soul. Oh my soul. Worship his holy name. Sing like never before. Oh my soul. I worship your holy name. Yes, I will worship your holy name. Lord, I worship your holy name. Sing like never before. Oh, my soul, I worship your holy name. Jesus, I will worship your holy name. Worship your
You know, it's hard to believe that another program has come and gone so quickly here on your weekend show. I want to take just a moment before the program closes today to share something with you that's very important. For the last several weeks, I have been wrestling with something, a call on my life, an opportunity, and our mind is pretty well made up of what we need to be doing. I'll be telling you more about that on next weekend's program. But I want you, if you would, to keep myself and my family in your prayers as we look at a new perspective journey in our lives, one that I never anticipated would happen. It kind of came into focus at the end of this past year. We have thought about it, debated it, prayed about it, talked to others, and it appears that there'll be change coming into our lives very, very soon, and I'll tell you more about it next weekend. How it affects this program moving forward, I really don't know, and I really can't say at this time, but know that I really believe the opportunity that is in front of me is truly a calling and an opportunity to do things that I've been wanting to do so desperately in my heart. Yes, I do love doing this program, and I pray the opportunity continues, that I can continue to do this program and share life with you. So if you would, keep my wife and myself in your prayers as we make our final decision and move forward on this great opportunity. I want to thank you for listening today. Remember, you can find us at yourweekendshow.com. That's yourweekendshow.com, or on Facebook at Your Weekend Show. Until next week at this same time, this is Bob Biermann wishing God's greatest blessings upon you.